Hello everyone, welcome back to the Chess Grandmasters channel for chess videos. We are following the ongoing World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Sergey Karjakin. And the game 1 ended in draw. So in case you have not checked out the game 1 yet, feel free to do so maybe after this. This is game 2 here. We have a 12 game match and the first to score 6.5 will be the winner of the World Chess Championship title. Let's move on to the game 2's analysis now. Karjakin has the white pieces and Carlsen has black. Karjakin stuck to his main opening move 1 e4 and Carlsen responded with e5. So this time we see a very classical system of play happening in the game with knight to f3, knight c6 and bishop to b5. The Spanish opening or the Ruy Lopez opening is on the board. In the last game, we saw Carlsen play the Trompowski's attack with white, surprising everyone. Well, it seems there are no surprises this time with the Ruy Lopez, a very frequently played opening in championship games. Here Carlsen immediately puts the question to the bishop with a6, a very standard choice in this position. Also common is the move knight to f6 here, which is called as the Berlin defense, and play continues here with white generally castling on the king side. Black grabs the pawn with knight takes e4 and white opens up with d4. Now black plays the move knight d6 here, gaining time on the undefended bishop on b5, which is actually one of the benefits of this line, keeping the bishop still on b5 square, where the moves a6 and bishop to a4 are not inserted, which allows black to gain a crucial tempo on this bishop. Here play continues with bishop takes c6, d takes c6 and d takes e5. This line is also known as the Berlin endgame, as the game continues with black moving the knight to f5 and white initiates the queen trade with queen takes d8 check and king takes d8. A lot of games have reached this position, and in fact notable games include the World Championship games between Carlsen and Vishy Anand, where the players reached this exact same position in some of their games. Carlsen has played the white and black side of this position, and this is a very well analyzed opening that's out there. Perhaps that's also a reason why Carlsen decides to avoid the Berlin this time and plays the move a6 after the bishop moves to b5. Karjakin reacts with the move bishop to a4. Not so much nowadays at the top level, but the move bishop to c6, which is called as the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez, is also playable. Black responds with d takes c6. White gives up the bishop pair in exchange for ruining the pawn structure of black's queen side. This is a popular technique, and Fischer is one of the known players who used to play this variation at times. Here, do note that in case you didn't know, the black's pawn is immune to capture. As for example, if knight takes e5, queen to d4, forking the e4 pawn and the knight on e5, white has to retreat the knight to f3 and black plays queen takes e4 check, forcing white to play queen to e2. This will result in queen takes e2 and king takes e2. Therefore, in that variation, black recovers the pawn and emerges with a superior endgame. So white does not play knight takes e5 generally, and instead plays moves like castles, or even moves like d3 or knight c3 are playable. But this is if the exchange variation comes into the picture of the game. It was not tried in this game, and Karjakin played a relatively more preferred choice in this position with bishop to a4. Play continues here with knight f6 and white plays castles. Black plays the move bishop to e7 here, which is the most popular and theoretically sound move in this position, and Karjakin responds with d3. This is a rare move. Rook to e1 is played here almost universally, with play continuing b5, bishop to b3, d6, c3, castles, h3, knight to a5, bishop to c2, c5, and d4. Notice how d4 is played at one shot, not having to play d3 and then d4, thereby saving some time. That's the more popular choice, but Karjakin chooses the move d3, solidifying the central e4 pawn in this position. Carlsen plays b5 as bishop takes c6. Winning the e5 pawn is now possible, and Karjakin plays the only move bishop b3. Now Carlsen plays the move d6, adding a defender to the e5 pawn, freeing up the knight on c6, making a move like knight to a5 now possible, attacking the bishop on b3. So white generally creates a retreating square for his bishop. Karjakin therefore plays a3. Note that the move a4 is also considered playable. However, c3 is a move that is possible too, although it would be slow as d3 has already been played. Note that the move c3 in the last variation was more attractive to white because white was able to play d4 in a single thrust, and c3 acted as a preparatory move to allow that. However, with d3 on the board already, c3 will not have the same effect as before. So Karjakin chooses to go with the move a3. After a3, black castles and white develops a piece with knight to c3. Note that if bishop e3 now, although knight g4 seems tempting at first, there is an even better move here that will place the knight on a far better square and will still put pressure on white's dark squared bishop, and that is the move d5, threatening the e4 pawn and also the thrust d4. And after d takes e5, knight takes e5, the black knight will be very well placed. So bishop e3 move would be considered inferior in this position. So instead, Karjakin plays the move knight to c3, which perhaps stops idea of d5. And after knight c3, black plays the move knight a5, hitting the bishop on b3, and so the bishop retreats to a2. However, black could have played a slightly more popular move here, leading to some very theoretical lines once again. That move is bishop to g4, pinning the white knight. And now the move bishop e3 will be forced, because knight to d4 will put a lot of pressure on the pinned white knight. So the moves bishop e3 followed by knight to d4, bishop takes d4, e takes d4, knight to d5 are natural. And from here, play could continue with moves such as knight to d7, knight takes e7 check, queen takes e7, h3, and black trades his bishop for the knight on f3. Note that retreating the bishop will be a mistake, as for example bishop h5 will be met with g4, bishop to g6, and knight takes d4 wins a pawn for white. But Carlsen avoids this long line of theory and plays knight to a5. And after bishop a2, plays bishop to e6, offering a trade of the light squared bishops. White's light squared bishop is considered to be his most dangerous weapon in many variations of the Ruy Lopez, and a trade of the light squared bishops will be for black's benefit. This is the reason why Carlsen doesn't seem to mind the double pawns in case of such a trade at the square e6 at this point. Also, such a trade will give an open f-file for black's rook, which might be useful for potential kingside attack by black in the future. But Karjakin doesn't want this, of course, and he pushes with the central thrust d4. This move not only adds an attacker to the e5 pawn, but also threatens to push forward with d5, which will give white significant space advantage. Carlsen makes use of this opportunity to misplace white's rook with bishop takes a2, rook takes a2. Now Carlsen plays a novelty with the move rook e8, adding an x-ray defender to the e5 pawn. Now although it seems white has the opportunity to win a pawn with d takes e5, d takes e5 and knight takes e5, black will then play bishop to d6, double attacking the knight with his bishop and with the rook, forcing the knight to move, and if the knight retreats, then he wins the pawn back with knight takes e4. This is made possible by the move rook e8, which was played at the outset. Now Karjakin sees all this and just puts his rook back on a1 from the awkward square a2, thereby wasting a tempo. At this point, I believe that black has equalized the game. He plays the move knight to c4. He has more queenside space and has more development. Notice how white's dark squared bishop is still undeveloped on c1 and cannot move now since the b2 pawn needs defense. So white tries the move rook e1. Carlsen plays the move rook to c8. At this point, perhaps preparing c5 next move. However, he missed the opportunity to play c5 right away, as the c5 square was adequately defended already and there was no need for an additional resource here. With c5 here, black would have gained even more space on the queen side. For example, if d takes e5, d takes e5 and queen takes d8, then bishop takes d8 holds a superior position for black. And if d takes c5, then d takes c5 gives black a dominant queenside space. If d5 instead, then black gets a formidable stone wall structure and restricts white's operations. But instead, Carlsen plays the move rook c8 and white creates a lift for his king with h3 and black does the same with the move h6. Notice that a move like d takes e5 here will be met with knight takes e5. So white finally decides to kick the knight on c4 with b3 as he cannot develop his dark squared bishop otherwise. The knight retreats to b6 and now the move bishop to b2 is played. It would still not be possible to win the e5 pawn here as d takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes d1 rook takes d1 will be followed with a move bishop to d6. And after a move like knight to c6, black gets his pawn back with knight takes on e4. So instead, the move bishop b2 that was played seems logical. Notice that the bishop on b2 is x-raying the pawn on e5, and Carlsen decides to defend the pawn with bishop to f8. Now Karjakin does play the move d takes e5, followed by d takes e5, and then the move a4. There are two attackers on the b5 pawn now, and Carlsen defends the pawn one more time with the move c6. Karjakin trades the queens with queen takes d8, rook c takes d8, and then he opens the a file for his rook with a takes b5 and a takes b5. Here Karjakin plays the interesting move knight to e2, attacking the e5 pawn but sacrificing the e4 pawn. Carlsen played the move bishop b4 as his response. It seems knight takes e4 was playable at this position, and game would have led to bishop takes e5, knight to d7 attacking the bishop, bishop back to b2, and then bishop to b4 attacking the e1 rook. After rook to d1 and bishop to c5, the move bishop d4 is playable. The position seems slightly better for white. Carlsen's move here reduces complications after bishop c3, bishop takes c3, and knight takes c3. However, instead of the move bishop c3, white could also try c3 here, but this would hamper the scope of white's dark squared bishop, and play would continue bishop c5, knight to g3, knight to d7, rook to c6, and so on. This would be better for black, as white will waste time to get his bishop back in the game. So Karjakin's move was better and maintains equality. Now black plays the move knight b to d7, fearing rook a6. Rook to a6 was played anyways, and black responded with rook c8, defending the c6 pawn. White then plays b4, stopping black from playing b4 himself, as he wants to maintain the knight on c3, defending the e4 pawn. Now black tries the move rook to e6. Also playable is the move c5, after which the game would have continued knight takes b5, c takes b4, knight to d6, forking the black rooks, rook to e6, pinning the white knight to the white rook, knight takes c8, and rook takes a6. However, white has the move knight e7 check here, forcing king to f8, and knight f5. Although equal, white's pieces seem to be a bit more active than black's in this variation. So Carlsen instead prepares c5 with the move rook to e6, and Karjakin, expecting c5, defends his b pawn with the move rook b1. Carlsen proceeds with c5 as planned, and Karjakin trades one pair of rooks with rook takes e6, f takes e6, and the game continues with knight takes b5, c takes b4, rook takes b4, and rook takes c2. Now white plays the move knight c6, and black plays the move rook to c1 check. Note that the difference would not have been much in case white played, instead of knight takes b5, the move b takes c5, which would have been followed by rook takes c5, knight takes b5, and rook takes c2. Here, white has to defend the e4 pawn through moves like knight to e1, rook to a2, and f3. In the last variation, however, the white rook that ended up on b4 was already defending e4. This subtle difference is the reason why I assume Karjakin played as he did in the game. Back to this position, after rook c1 check, Karjakin played the only reasonable move, king h2, and Carlsen attacked the f2 pawn with rook to c2, and Karjakin returned with his king to g1, defending f2. At this position, the players agreed to a draw. Let's analyze why Karjakin had to return the king to g1 and not to g3. Let's look at the variation rook to c6, forcing the knight away from the defense of e4. Let's say knight b7, rook c1 check, king h2, and rook to f1, attacking f2. Here the position is still a draw if white plays moves like rook to b5, for example, counter-attacking black's weak pawns. However, if he tries to defend with king to g3, then the game will come to a quick finish with knight h5 check, king to h4, rook takes f2, losing for white, and white cannot capture the knight. For example, king takes h5 will be met with knight f6 check, king h4, rook takes g2, and any move such as knight to d6, for example, will be answered with g5 check, followed by knight takes g5, h takes g5, and checkmate. In the final position, although black seems slightly better with a relatively active rook, precise play seems to ensure a draw, and that is perhaps the reason why a draw was agreed between the players. This brings us to the end of the analysis of Game 2 of the World Chess Championship match between Carlsen and Karjakin. I hope you found this video to be useful. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and stay tuned for more. Bye for now.